Tensions may escalate. That's coming up on Awani International. The US has officially doubled tariffs on steel and aluminium beginning today, but Washington says the hike will exempt one key partner, the UK. The announcement comes just hours after the British government said the two countries have agreed to implement a trade pact as soon as possible. Now, officials from the UK and US recently met in Paris to fast-track the implementation of a tariff relief deal. The UK was the first country to secure such an agreement with Washington, aimed at protecting British businesses and jobs across key sectors. A government spokesperson said the UK was actively working to eliminate the existing 25% US tariff on steel. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and US President Donald Trump had reached a deal on May 8th to reduce tariffs on British car and steel exports to the US. The UK also agreed to lower tariffs on beef and ethanol, but implementation of the deal has been delayed.
Mr. Prime Minister, will you get a backstop with you?
The US envoy to Ukraine warns of a sharp escalation in the war, saying risk levels are going way up. President Donald Trump's envoy, Keith Kellogg, says the rise in tensions is due to Ukraine's drone strikes on bombers at multiple air bases in Russia. Now, he said such attacks could trigger unpredictable responses from Moscow, given the strategic threats. Ukrainian drones had hit airfields in Siberia and Russia's far north over the weekend, striking targets up to 4,300 kilometers away. Kellogg said the damage to Russian bombers was less important than that of psychological impacts on the Kremlin. According to White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, Trump was not informed of the drone strikes in advance. Meanwhile, peace talks in Istanbul earlier this week saw little progress as Ukraine offered moderate terms while Russia held firm. We'll be back with more after the break. Stay tuned.
Yang paling hebat, aku. Kau nak sampai tempat aku? Teruskan bermimpi.
Hebat? Kau yakin? Tenagaku terbukti. Aku dah lebih jauh. Kau bukan macam aku. Pilihan kau, punca kejatuhan kau. Memang ada yang hebat. Hingga munculnya yang terhebat.
Welcome back. Mexico plans to ask the US to remove it from the list of countries facing a 50% tariff on steel imports. Its economy minister, Marcelo Ebrard, says he will travel to Washington on June 6 for meetings with his American counterparts. Ebrard called the tariffs unfair, arguing that the US has a trade surplus with Mexico in steel. He also expressed hope that, as with previous tariffs, the US would eventually have to adjust its stance due to the high economic consequences. US President Donald Trump announced the increase in tariffs on steel and aluminium from 25% to 50% effective today. The White House says the move aims to counter foreign countries that offload low-priced excess steel and aluminium in the US, undercutting domestic industries. The move fueled tensions with key US trading partners, with the European Union warning over the weekend that it was prepared to retaliate against levies. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says that his country has been trying to negotiate tariffs with the US. However, he vows to take action if no agreement is reached. President Donald Trump on Friday said he planned to increase tariffs on imports of steel from 25% to 50%, ratcheting up pressure on global steel producers. The tariffs would apply to millions of tons of steel and aluminium imports from Canada, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, and other countries that had been entering the US duty-free. Lula also expressed his solidarity with Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, after Trump has repeatedly expressed a desire to annex Canada, a proposition fiercely rebuffed by Carney. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has urged the US to meet China halfway and create the conditions needed to restore stable ties. Speaking to the new US Ambassador to China, David Perdue, in Beijing, Wang says mutual respect and cooperation are key, stressing that China has strictly implemented the recent Geneva Trade Consensus. Perdue responded by saying US President Donald Trump has great respect for Chinese President Xi Jinping, underscoring the importance of continued constructive engagement between both leaders. He reaffirms his role as the US Ambassador to China to maintain close communication with Beijing and ensuring mutual respect. Tensions have escalated in recent weeks, with both the US and China accusing each other of violating the Geneva trade deal that paused and lowered tariffs temporarily. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Trump and Xi are likely to speak this week in an effort to iron out their differences. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has described Chinese President Xi Jinping as very tough and extremely hard to make a deal with. This comes at a time when the White House has been suggesting that the two leaders could talk this week amid rising trade tensions. Washington and Beijing have blamed each other for violating a trade agreement reached in Switzerland on May 12th. The deal included a 90-day suspension on most tariffs and a rollback of Chinese countermeasures imposed since April. However, China has not significantly eased restrictions on rare earths exports, defying US expectations. On the other side, Beijing has also criticized US efforts to limit its access to advanced technology. Adding to the tension, a US trade court last week ruled that Trump exceeded his authority when he imposed many of the tariffs under emergency powers. Less than 24 hours later, a federal appeals court temporarily reinstated the tariffs, saying it would review the government's appeal. China has rolled out a special multiple entry visa for 10 ASEAN countries and Timor-Leste. Eligible travelers from the 11 nations visiting China on business, along with their spouses and children, will be offered the ASEAN visa. It will allow multiple entries over the span of 5 years, with each stay lasting up to 180 days. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said the new scheme aims to further facilitate cross-border travel between China and Southeast Asia. The new visa comes on top of existing visa-free agreements that China already has with several countries, including Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore. Travelers from the three countries currently enjoy mutual visa-free travel arrangements for up to 30 days. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian vows that Tehran will not yield to US pressure to dismantle its nuclear program. In a televised speech, he declares that Iran will not compromise their scientific, expert and nuclear rights under any circumstances. Iran is poised to reject a US proposal to end a decades-old nuclear dispute, a senior Iranian diplomat who is close to Iran's negotiating team told Reuters on Monday. The US proposal for a new nuclear deal was presented to Iran on Saturday by Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr al-Busaidi, who has been mediating talks between Tehran and Washington. After 5 rounds of discussions between Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, several obstacles remain. Among them are Iran's rejection of a US demand that it commit to scrapping uranium enrichment and its refusal to ship abroad its entire existing stockpile of highly enriched uranium, possible raw material for nuclear bombs. Tehran says it wants to master nuclear technology for peaceful purposes and has long denied accusations by Western powers that it is seeking to develop nuclear weapons. South Korea's new Liberal President Lee Jae-myung pledges to lift the nation from the brink of collapse following a failed martial law attempt. He vows to revive an economy battered by global protectionism. Lee's landslide win in Tuesday's snap election marks a political shift in Asia's fourth largest economy after widespread backlash toppled Yoon Suk-yeol just 3 years into his term.
정쟁 수단으로 전락한 안보와 평화, 무관심과 무책임으로 무너진 민생과 경제, 그리고 장갑차와 자동소총에 파괴된 우리의 민주주의를 다시 일으켜 세울 시간입니다. 이재명 정부는 실용적 시장주의 정부가 될 것입니다. 국익 중심의 실용 외교를 통해 글로벌 경제 안보 환경 대전환의 위기를 국익 극대화의 기회로 만들겠습니다. 굳건한 한미 동맹을 토대로 한미일 협력을 다지고 주변 국가의 관계도 국익과 실용의 관점에서 접근하겠습니다.
Lee faces what could be the most daunting set of challenges for a South Korean leader in nearly 3 decades, ranging from healing a country deeply scarred by the martial law attempt to tackling unpredictable protectionist moves by the US, a major trading partner and a security ally. This week on Wu Says, we pondered the critical question shaping the global economy. Can China innovate its way out of America's technology chokehold? Melissa Idris discusses this with Professor Emeritus Dato Dr. Wu Wing Tai.
It certainly would slow down China for a while. In fact, it slows down both the US and China.
Oh.
Because good ideas occur on both sides of the Pacific. And the partnership between the two countries greatly accelerated the pace of technological improvements. Just look at Silicon Valley. Look at the engineers. So many of them that are doing the new version of the programs of Adobe and so forth were mainland Chinese educated in the United States. And if you look at biomedical research, America may design the new bioproduct, but the testing is done in China. So there, the collaboration has been good for both countries. What happens with the present is the global rate of innovation has slowed down.
Oh, because of this Cold War?
It makes us both worse off, definitely.
Okay.
We got to find a way to get along, to be able to settle what we are unhappy about China. In other words, certain things that China must do is it should honor what it promised in November 1999. WTO. And the other thing that the Americans are very unhappy about, which they see as unfair competition, is the intellectual piracy that they observe. They are able now to track the hacking into the US firms by specific military units in China. In other words, the army in China, some units of it, based in advanced cities, spy on US commercial companies, and presumably they pass this knowledge on to Chinese commercial companies. So that's unfair competition. Army spying on army is normal. In fact, it gives a sense of safety. I know what you're capable of, and you know what I'm capable of. But to use an army units for commercial spying, that crosses a line. Private companies spying on private companies, that's also normal. Okay. And we have laws to deal with that. But how do you hold the military units of a country as responsible? So that aspect of intellectual piracy has to be amended.
Right. Catch the full conversation of this on all Awani International's social media accounts at Power Affairs. That report wraps up Awani International. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astraawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. That's all for now. I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for watching and good night.